Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi PCL667B 18-volt workbench light. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, starting off at the bottom of the tool, we have the 18-volt battery slot. The slot will accept any of Ryobi's batteries that are lithium or even the older NiCad batteries if anybody still has those kicking around. And you can adapt batteries over from other brands via third-party adapter. However, you do that at your own risk. Now, the battery slot itself seems to have fairly good tolerances with only a little bit of play or looseness to speak of, and I have zero complaints or worries about batteries falling out or becoming disconnected as long as they have been fully inserted into the tool. Now, when it comes to the battery life, you're going to be getting anywhere in between a couple of hours up to around 16 hours depending on what you have the light set at, and this is a fairly good performance as far as I'm concerned. I personally have been using this light for a little while at this point, and it seems to work just fine, and even after a couple hours of use I still have typically a single bar left on my 4 amp hour battery, so I'm fairly happy with its performance and it seems to be doing a good job. So as far as I'm concerned, everything here gets a pass. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the power button. The power button is located on the base of the tool in front of the LED panel and will allow you to cycle through the different lighting options. Now, the power button itself is made out of a rubberized cover that is above a cycle through switch and is definitely an improvement over the previous design, which was almost identical except they went with a harder rubberized cover that had a smaller zone for, well, being able to depress it, which means that this is definitely way easier to work with when you have gloves on or even when you're barehanded because of that softer rubber. So I definitely think that they did a better job with the switch on this particular light versus the previous light. Now, when it comes to the overall operation of the light, when you first press the button on the light, it will turn the light on to its brightest mode where both light panels are illuminated. When you press the button again, then the light will dim slightly, and then when you press it a third time, then the bottom panel will turn off, but the top panel will remain lit and become brighter again. And then when you press it a fourth time, then the top panel will dim slightly, and then with the fifth press, the light will turn off. You can hold the power button and then the light will turn off that way, but it's easier to just cycle through all the different options because you have to hold the button for a very long period of time in order to get the light to turn off that way. So quite frankly, they could have did a little bit better with a smart switch or something, but it's still definitely an improvement over the previous generation, so I'm still happy with the improvements that they decided to go with. So as far as the power button on this particular light is concerned, it's definitely better than the previous generation. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the hang hooks. The hang hooks are located at the top of the light and on the base of the light near the battery. They are made out of metal on this particular light, which is a change from the previous generation light, which had them made out of plastic. Also, the overall shape has changed, and they have done away with one of the features of the previous light, which was the ability to mount this particular light on a screw or nail that has been hammered into the wood as long as the spacing was appropriate. They've decided to go do away with that particular feature and make the hook slightly stronger because they made it out of metal, and also give you the ability to rotate the light, but we'll talk more about that here in a minute. Now, the base hook on this particular light will pull straight out from the base, and it will give you a little bit of rotation. Whether or not that is intended, I'm not completely sure because it doesn't feel like an overall very smooth operation, and there is a little bit of plastic tinkling around in the base of the light, and I'm not sure if it was something I did or if it came that way from the factory, but overall it doesn't affect the overall operation of the light, so I'm still happy with the performance. Now, the top hook is also located on top of a turret which will rotate, and since the base of the light is also on top of a turret that rotates, that means that you'll be able to rotate the light independently once you have it mounted on a string, wire, or permanent hooks that are hanging out of the ceiling or out of your wall, which gives you quite a bit of different range or ability versus the previous generation light where you could only point the light basically, you know, at like 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock, depending on which way you have the light facing. On this particular light, you have the ability to rotate the light after you have it mounted, which means that you can get the light directed at where you need it versus, well, not where you need it, which I think is definitely a very good improvement, and I'm very happy with the overall changes they decided to go with, even though we did lose some of the mounting features. And if you are creative enough, you can probably figure out a workaround to allow you to still mount this with screws or nails. But for me personally, that's not something I typically do, so it doesn't really affect me personally. So quite frankly, I'm happy with the overall changes that we got here, and I think that Ryobi did a good job in changing this next generation of light to be a little bit more user-friendly. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the turrets or the swiveling bases a little bit more in depth. Now, it's a fairly simple design which will allow you to rotate the light basically for either left or right about 180 degrees, but you are unable to fully turn the light around in a 360 simply because of, well, the wiring. Now, with that being said, it still gets the job done, and I don't really have any major complaints about the overall design that they decided to go with, since it means that you'll be able to direct your light more efficiently. But if you do have the light panel turned sideways and you have a small battery in this light, anything under, well, let's say 4 amp hours, the light is prone to tipping over. So just be aware that if you are planning on using this particular light with a smaller battery, you want to keep that light panel, well, pointed straight forward unless you have the light tipped over or permanently mounted in a location above your workstation. So yeah, other than that, everything here is fairly typical and I have 0 complaints. So yeah, moving on. Okay, next up we have the hinge. Now the hinge on this particular light is a fairly standard design. There is a metal bolt that is secured via a nut, and you can tighten it if it becomes loose. Just be aware that if you do end up needing to tighten the bolt down, that you don't do it too tight because, well, quite frankly, it's still a metal bolt inside a plastic housing, and, well, metal and plastic don't, well, get along when torque is introduced into the situation, if you catch my drift. Now, with that being said, the light will allow you to unfold it from basically a 360 light into a 90-degree light, and this will mean that it'll be useful for, well, illuminating the top of whatever you're trying to do, say reading a book or cooking or something along those lines, or if you're just trying to contain your light so it doesn't spread too much. So it's a fairly useful design, and I have 0 complaints about the overall functionality of the hinge. Just be aware that the hinge is a completely smooth travel, which means there are no positive stops. So if you are trying to use this light, say in a moving vehicle, and you want to have it pointed, say, up at 11 o'clock or something, it probably will end up adjusting itself since there are no positive stops, and it will simply vibrate itself into a more neutral position. But as long as you have it in a stationary position, you won't have any issues. So yeah, that's about the sum of it. Moving on. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the LED panels. Now, the LED panels in some ways are similar and in other ways are very different. Now, they both feature a plastic diffuser panel, which helps diffuse the light and spray it evenly and protect your eyes if you accidentally look at the panel. But in other ways, they are different, as in, well, the old one only had a single line of LED beads, where the new one has, well, 2 lines of LED beads, and is basically also double the number of LED beads, obviously because of, well, having 2 lines. And that means that you're going to be having a little bit more light being produced by this particular light, even if the LED beads are about the same brightness. This particular light is going to be generating around 1,700 lumens of light versus the previous generation, which was only producing, I think, around 950, if my memory serves me correctly. So it's definitely an increase when it comes to the overall light that it's producing. The other difference is the newer light, it has a much more enclosed panel design versus the old one's more open design, which I think in some ways is an improvement, but in other ways is a drawback. Say there's less light bleeding, and you can direct the light better so you won't disturb other people in the room if you're trying to use this to read by, but if you're trying to illuminate the room, it doesn't spread the light as evenly. So I think there's definitely some trade-offs there, but I don't really think it's that big of a deal, and I don't think most people are going to notice that much of a difference. Speaking of differences, if you do own the previous generation of light and all you're using the previous generation for is to, well, work by or read by, I don't think you really need to upgrade to this particular light unless you are doing something where you need more light, say video work, or if you have, well, worse vision because you're older or you just have a vision problem. I can understand then maybe wanting to upgrade to this particular light because it is a bit brighter. But honestly, if all I was doing was working on, say, a small project or something, or say underneath a sink or cabinet or on an engine or something, I think the previous generation light produces more than enough light. It's only when you're using, say, a camera and you need to have those light levels higher so you can shoot at a higher frame rate that you're really going to notice the difference as far as I'm concerned. But then again, you might be more sensitive to light than I am, so it's going to be up to you. Personally, I think the new light is definitely going to be worth it for a lot of individuals, and the fact that you have that rotating base means that it's far more useful in a lot of situations than the previous generation light. Because of that rotating base, you will be able to angle it underneath the car far easier, and you won't have to have it directly underneath wherever you're working off or off to the side where you're not getting the light where you need it. So quite frankly, in that regard, I think the new one is definitely the better option here. But then again, I'm sure somebody will disagree with me, especially if you like hanging it on the side of a wall or underneath a short ceiling or something. So yeah, pros and cons for each light. Just remember that it's going to be up to you and your own personal needs when you are making the decision to purchase a work light. But with that being said, this light is fairly impressive and can light up large amounts of areas that are nearby, and it was going to be fine for a practical work light. Searchlight, not so much, but as a standard work light, it's going to work just fine. So basically the key differences on these particular lights is the new one is brighter and has better options for rotating the light to get to where you need to have it if you lay the light on the ground or have it hanging somewhere. But the old light has more hanging options and is just overall, well, older. That's about the sum of it. I think the new light is definitely going to be the superior light here, and as long as you aren't going to miss those different hanging options, I think the newer light is the way to go for those reasons I've already listed. So if you are interested in picking up the older light, I would do it sooner than later, simply because it's going to become very hard to find in very short order. So yeah, the newer light I think is superior in a lot of different design aspects, but is missing some features that the old light had. That's about the sum of it. Let's go ahead and talk about the weight of the light and then the pros and cons. Okay, without a battery, the light weighs 810 grams, which is a little under 2 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour battery, it weighs 1,512 grams, which is a little over 3.3 pounds. So it's a fairly lightweight light. Okay, and the first pro is 18 volt. 18 volt means that this will work with all your Ryobi 18 volt batteries, and you can adapt batteries over from other brands via third-party adapter. Just remember, if you do that at your own risk. Turret, swivelly head, whatever you want to call it, this is a very good feature, and definitely it's going to come in handy for when you are working in low positions or trying to mount it above your head and you need to angle the light more towards whatever you're working on. So in my opinion, this is a pro. Smaller. This is a slightly smaller light, and that is going to be useful for when you're transporting and storing this particular tool. So in my opinion, this is a pro. Hanging hooks. Overall, I'm glad that they decided to go with a more beefy option than the previous model's plastic hooks, and at the end of the day, I do consider this to be a pro. Better power button. At the end of the day, the power button is definitely better designed on the newer light and is going to require less of an effort in order to turn the light on or off. So quite frankly, I do consider this to be a pro. 4 modes. I personally am not a fan of having to cycle through multiple modes in order to find the one I want or in order to turn off the light. So the fact that there are only 4 different modes is a benefit for me personally. Bright. This is a fairly bright work light, and while it may not be the brightest on the market, it is definitely superior to the previous model, and in my opinion that makes it a pro. And the first con would be the price. $70 for this particular work light is a little bit on the high side. I think if the price was closer to $50, that would be more appropriate, but who the heck knows in today's inflation-ridden world. So in my opinion, this is a con. And the last con would be less hanging options. Unfortunately, even though they refined the model a little bit, they did take away some of the hanging abilities that this light possessed, and in my opinion, that is a bit of a con. And that's it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular work light. I really do like this particular work light. I like the upgraded features, and I definitely think it's a good redefinition of this particular model. But at the end of the day, that price tag is very prohibitive. And I really don't think it's worth $70. If it was priced closer to the $50 mark, I think it would be far easier to recommend, and I would probably have picked up a second one already. But unfortunately, it's priced at $70, so I'm going to be waiting around until it goes on sale over on Tool Direct or at Home Depot around the holidays, if it goes on sale at HomeDepot.com around the holidays. Which, who knows, it may or may not. I have no idea personally. So quite frankly, it's a great little work light. It's definitely an improvement over the previous generations, but the price is rather, well, frustrating to say the least. So yeah, that's about the sum of it. If you can afford it, buy it. If you can't, wait till it goes on sale. And that is it for this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. God bless.